It's my great pleasure tonight to welcome you to this wonderful event with Dr. Nilanjana Premaratna. We'll say a few words in a minute about Nilanjana, about her work, but I want to first welcome my co-host tonight, Professor Terrell Carver, and this is very unusual. Terrell is Professor of Political Theory at the University of Bristol, and he's one of our most loyal participants in our events, and I think almost every time we see Terrell zooming in from Bristol, but tonight Terrell is here in person, and he's flown in literally just for this evening. He's flying out again tomorrow morning, so he's here just for this evening.
So I'll just quickly say many thanks, Roland. It's quite a thrill to be the other side of the looking glass going through, and thanks very much for setting this up, and also with such a great book, which I really enjoyed reading the book.
Now, it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest for tonight, Dr. Nilanjana Premaratna. I have had the privilege of knowing Nila for many, many years. We first met, is it about 16 years ago? I can't remember, 17 years ago, when she was doing her Master's in Peace Studies here at UQ. And then Nila stayed on afterwards to do her PhD. And in many ways, the book we'll be talking about, I actually have the book at home, but I do have the PhD thesis version of the book right here, which she finished quite a few years ago. And in fact, one of the things I would like to talk with Nila today is about the challenge of turning a PhD into a book, and the process that she has done at that time under difficult kind of, working conditions, working in precarity for a couple of years back in Sri Lanka, teaching short courses in Thailand and so on. So I want to talk a little bit about that difficult transition period that many of us have after a PhD. Nila then had a postdoc at the University of Zurich in my native place in Switzerland, and then a postdoc in the north of Sweden at the University of Umeå. And she is now a lecturer in international politics at the University of Newcastle in the UK. So it's an absolutely wonderful pleasure to have you with us, Nila, back in UQ, not in person, unfortunately, but at least on Zoom.
Thank you very much, Roland. Thanks a lot for the generous introduction, and it's truly an honor and a privilege to be a part of the seminar series and to have both of you here. And I'm humbled to know that both of you took time to read the book and to have a conversation with me. So thank you very much.
Great pleasure. And we do it as always. Terrell and I will sort of have a bit of a chat about your book and about your ongoing work on the arts and peace building, and then be opening up for everyone to come in for an informal discussion. But Terrell, did you want to have a...
Yes, I'd quite like to start off with the personal story in the background, because there always is one. And indeed, in the book, the concern with peace building, particularly in Sri Lanka, arises in quite a visceral story about your childhood. But I was curious about the background in theatre studies and where that came from. And I'll pick up on Corin's comment. We were chatting earlier about how good the book is in terms of surveying the theorizations of theatricality. I've never read such a sort of comprehensive and synoptic discussion of theatre theory that goes into so many aspects of the things that happen under the heading of theatricality, and also so much detail that then actually connects to the specific research areas that you did in Sri Lanka, West Bengal, and where was the other one?
Nepal.
Nepal, right, thank you. So I was headed the wrong way around the Indian subcontinent. So could you fill us in a bit on the background, particularly on the theatre side?
Sure. Thank you very much, Terrell. Particularly when it comes to theatre, it was a very pragmatic decision. after all. So I did an undergrad in English literature, and I wanted to figure out a way of combining my personal interest in arts and my academic background in literature, and then bring it together with this, with peace building, because that's what I was working on in the country, and that's something that I saw that there was a need. I was reviewing the literature, and at that time, I started this work quite some time ago during my master's, actually in 2007-8 or so. There wasn't a lot of literature around the arts and peace building, or arts in international relations. Theatre was the only area where we had some research, or easier ways of connecting because of forum theatre, Augusta Bowl, and all that. And so I thought, okay, fine, then I'll focus on theatre, because that gives me an entry into discussing what I'm interested in. But I also have a little bit of material to work on. So that was a rather pragmatic choice in many ways at that time. But now things have changed. There's a lot more opportunity for us to look at other things and so.
Okay, just quickly, in the first study about the mobile touring group, I kept thinking about Shakespeare Waller from 1965. I just wonder if you ever saw the film.
I haven't actually, but that will go in my list.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Satyajit Ray classic. I mean, it's a different sort of setup, and obviously colonial, but as a 1965 period piece, I just thought it would be worth mentioning.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll certainly have a look.
Look, I was just wondering if you can sort of maybe give us a bit of a summary of what the book does, what your research does. Sort of you argue that theatre basically as an art form is particularly well suited to address certain aspects of conflict and post-conflict reconstruction, of peace building. Why did you find that theatre has this capacity? Because we don't usually think of theatre as something highly political. We certainly don't think of something that's part of international politics, part of peace building. Why did you find that was kind of an important part in the 3 case studies you've done on peace building?
I point to the multivocal and dialogic form of theatre as what sets it apart as being uniquely suited to dealing with post-war transition and creating peace after conflict. So when I look at each theatre group from, so I look at theatre group from, as Terrell said, one from Sri Lanka, one from India, and one from Nepal. With each theatre group, I looked at how they engaged with the specific conditions of that particular context through their own approaches. And I also looked at how how their engagement incorporates the group processes of the theatre group. So with Janakaralia, they use applied theatre, so it drew from a combination of different theatre forms, and they responded to the ethno-linguistic dynamics of the Sri Lankan conflict. And I look at how they bring together parties and narratives in conflict together through the theatre space. As a multi-ethnic, mobile, residential theatre group, it brought together the Sinhalese and Tamil actors, and through their audiences, they brought together the Sinhalese and Tamil groups together. And they produced and performed plays in Sinhala and Tamil languages. And their costumes, their music, their jazz steps all integrate different elements from these different cultural traditions that we have among the Sinhalese and the Tamils. So in some ways, it was not just a multi-ethnic bilingual theatre group that more or less envisioned peace for the audiences, or peaceful coexistence for the audience, but it produced a harmonious, sort of like a microcosm of Sri Lanka that we could become. So in that sense, it presented this vision for people, saying that this is what we could be, we could aspire for. With the other two theatre groups, it's slightly different because so Jana Sanskriti from India used forum theatre to bring out prevalent but less heard narratives of structural violence in West Bengal. What they did was they would engage with these, like you do in forum theatre, the Jana Sanskriti would choose, develop their plays around certain narrative, like elements of that they found in their communities, have discussions with the communities, figure out the key issues that they have in the communities, and then develop their plays based on those. And then they would keep performing these plays over and over in the same community. So in doing so, they encourage the communities to go one step deeper each time. So what they would not notice today, they would notice in 2 months' time when the play is performed a second time. So that was what they did. And so they performed resistance to the narratives of structural violence at community level and as a way of triggering transformation. The third theatre group, the Nepalese one, Sarvanam. So Sarvanam excluded citizen perspectives, a part of the public discourse on the Nepalese conflict through their theatre practice and plays. So their theatre developed, their theatre, they had different plays, and some of their plays would present this citizen perspective, and some of their plays would be more critical towards, present critical viewpoints towards the higher level politics that are going on in the country. So looking at it from both sides.
I'd like to pick you up a bit on peace building, because I think we all probably like to talk about theatre, but it's rather more difficult talking about peace. And actually in IR, international relations studies, people zero in on conflict, but trying to specify exactly what peace is and what it is to build peace is, of course, a huge challenge. So what you do in the book is say that there is not only a gap in the literature about peace building, but certainly a gap in the process, and the theatre offers a lot of potential for those who are actually involved in the process as it works out. So if we go to the case study in West Bengal, you actually promise that the connection between theatre and peace building can yield transformation. And transformation is a very interesting concept there. And I think we could explore the relationship between transformation and peace. So what happens in West Bengal, as I get the story, is that you actually identify some instances of transformation, namely the personal testimony and actual personal action against patriarchy in resisting the dowry system. And also you connect in a really good discussion of structural violence, how the dowry system is connected with the subordination, abuse, and worse of women in the workplace. So you've got both the public workplace realm and the private realm going, all linked to structural violence and patriarchy. It's quite brilliant. So I really give you that one. But does it actually produce peace? Because you also deal with emotion, affect, empathy, and anger. So when the individuals and actual young couples come out in a space and report that they're resisting patriarchy and that they're transformed, does this actually build peace? How many members of the community are going to be angry about how patriarchy and feudalism, are being taken down. And so I wonder if you found out anything along those lines with your very detailed field work in West Bengal.
Yeah, that's quite an insightful question, Terrell. Thank you. Yes, you're right. It does create tensions, and it produces tensions in the community, and this has led to acts of violence, sometimes at personal spaces, and arguments between people. But then I think what I'm trying to get at in that with that chapter is to say that peace is something that goes a bit deeper, and how like a more abstract understanding of peace, where we see peace as being living in a just society. So that's where I was coming from when I was thinking of Jana Sanskriti's work as peace building.
Right. Thank you. That's really interesting to hear that, because that was something I wanted to, hear more about, the connection. Well, what exactly you mean by transformation? And of course, there is a feminist analytical literature that ends up in a point of transformation. So I think that's probably where you ended up. Thank you very much.
Look, I was just wondering, since you're on that topic, did you want to say a little bit more about the challenges of actually conducting field research in that space? Like, you were hanging out with theater groups. Like, how does that work? Like, how did you kind of encounter that? What were the challenges and opportunities? And
it was a really enriching experience to be able to conduct extensive field work. And I think I grew a lot as a person in directions I didn't really think about. And I found some, I think I became a better person as a result of doing the field work as well. I did roughly 6 months of field work in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. And it was, I had prior contact with the Sri Lankan theatre group, but with both the other theatre groups, I had already established contact. I had talked with them, I reached out through email and over the phone about a year, starting from about, I think, a year before I actually went for field work, but that was my first time in actually seeing them in person. The process was, so I had planned everything very carefully. For example, before going for field work, I knew that it would be the monsoon season. And during the monsoons, it'll be a bit difficult to travel around. So I wanted to spend the monsoon time, the worst part of the monsoon, in Sri Lanka, because that's the place that I was most comfortable with. And I knew the theatre group there and so on. So that's how I planned. So with the West Bengal theatre group, once again, Jana Sanskriti, so I planned to go there once the monsoon ended, because they told me that they don't perform during the monsoon because the roads are not motorable. It's difficult to get to the Sundarban area. So I knew that. So I planned towards the end of the field work. And as it turned out to be, monsoons were late that year. I went in 2 days later. We had a performance scheduled in the first week I was going to be there. I arrived 2 days later, monsoon started. It was pouring rain. You couldn't even walk from one building to the other without getting wet. The umbrellas would not survive. So I was there for 2 months and a bit, I think. But I was able to see rehearsals and so on, because people would come there and to the theatre group. I was staying with the theatre groups here. So I was at the center, which was very lucky in many ways. It had its own difficulties, but I think that was the right decision. And it turned out to be rather enriching for me as a result. So I got to meet a lot of people who would make their way to the center. So I got to talk with people, see rehearsals, see how meetings are done and how they construct plays and so on. But for an actual performance, I only got to see the performances in the last couple of weeks of my fieldwork, because there was absolutely no way of performing outside, which was what they would do. And then there was this one time when I got so excited because we got invited to go do a performance in an event further away in the regions where they were, somebody has organized an event and they had invited Jana Sanskrit to come and perform. So we all got into a van and spent 5-6 hours traveling in the Jeep to the site. And then there were some people, somewhat of a crowd gathered as well. And we waited around at the stage for about 2-3 hours or so, but nothing seemed to be happening. People were just coming, gathering, and there was music playing, but nothing seems to be actually happening there. So I was a bit confused. And then all of a sudden, one of the people from the theatre group came and said, okay, we are leaving now. It was very confusing. So we all bundled back into the Jeep and traveled 5-6 hours in these rainy, unmotorable roads back to the theatre group. And it turned out that, so this was a covered sort of like an area. So they had a big tent and so on. So that's why I got my hopes up for seeing a performance, because it was all covered and there was shelter and so on. But yeah, it turned out that the event was organized by a political party that they did not know about this, about a person affiliated with a political party. And the theatre group wasn't aware of this before. And they tried to negotiate some things, but then they couldn't come to an agreement. So they decided not to perform. So we all went back. So things like that. It was rather unpredictable. And in Nepal as well, I went there, and then 2 weeks into I got to meet the theatre group. They were putting up a new play, and that's what I went there for, And then a couple of weeks into the fieldwork, but the bunds started. So during the bunds time, they would close everything down. Transportation, shops, everything would be closed. So then it was constant bunds day after day. And then they would open up for a couple of days, and then it would be a bund after that. So it was a rather irregular process. And thankfully, I had already met everybody. And then I was able to make phone calls and say, oh, okay, shall we meet? And so on. And then towards the end, it got better. So it opened up again, and we were able to, they were able to perform their new play, and I was able to see it. So that was good in that sense. But things can be rather unpredictable despite careful planning. But in the end, things work out, I guess. Yeah.
So look, we have another 5 or 10 minutes of our dialogue before we open up to everyone else here. And we have a lot more questions that we want to ask you, including about your current work, where you use more visual forms of you look at visuality and film in peace building. But I want to first ask you something else, and that is a little bit along the lines of the struggle you just mentioned now. And that is the struggle of, you produced this absolutely wonderful PhD thesis with the field research you just described. And then you turned this PhD thesis into a book. So I was wondering, especially for many of us here who kind of finished PhD or about to finish PhDs and have to struggle afterwards, you had, you worked in very precarious positions after your PhD. You couldn't find a position right away. You went back home to Sri Lanka. You had, very short-term teaching stints in Thailand. At the same time, you tried to kind of publish, a book out of your thesis. I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of handled this struggle and how you ended up succeeding. You got a book, you have a permanent position. How did you experience that struggle, and what were the ups and downs and the lessons you learned from it?
As you mentioned, it was a bit of a struggle. And I think after finishing the PhD, I went back to Sri Lanka, and I wasn't, so I ended up taking up this consultancy with a Thai organization to help set up an education program, a master's program, and then like adult education stuff for activists from the region. It was absolutely fascinating, very enriching, sort of like work that felt really meaningful. So it was great, but it also meant that setting up a new program, a residential 3-month program, is quite a lot of work. And it was the first time we were doing it, so there was a lot of unexpected things that would come up and so on. So we would be, once I get out of my room at 7 o'clock in the morning, I would be attending to things, sorting things out, resolving stuff until 11 o'clock at night. So I managed to do the book proposal for the book during that time. So I would have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get a couple of hours in. But even then, I think you are tired after doing a PhD, and I didn't really give myself time for it. And also life happens. So you need to take time a bit. And I didn't really give myself the time, and I didn't really know how to do it. So it took me quite a lot of time. And then I ended up getting the postdoctoral fellowship in at the University of Zurich. And that's where I managed to work on the PhD, turning the PhD thesis into a book. And that process was also quite hard. In some ways, I had worked on this project and in this area for quite some time. And I think it took me, I needed to take time away from the project a bit before I could come back to it with fresh eyes. So that was one of the key things that I learned. I was trying to force myself to get it done, but didn't really work. And when I gave myself permission to work on something different for a bit of time, then it started working, and then things became easier, and then I ended up managing to do it. So that's one of the key things that I've learned, like, it is good to be persistent, but then realize when something's not working.
Thanks. I'll just close with a quick congratulations on your achievement in getting through the process and producing such a wonderful book. I'll just mention something that I got out of it, and that I think possibly, you may disagree, connects all three instances. That is, what came over to me was the theatre was a safer space in which people could say things, have conversations with each other. The actors could say things and act things out. People could react. And as you say, it was very dialogic, but not just between the actors and the audience. The actual experience of going to the theatre in this kind of communities plural setting where you've got different kinds of people coming together. And that indeed is the whole issue there, and really what you're tracking, that they can say things there that they wouldn't like to say out in the street, which might be more dangerous, or indeed at home in the extended family structure in West Bengal. And there's one picture that you've got there, which I presume you took yourself, which shows the mobile theatre tent in Sri Lanka. And the picture's taken from outside the tent, and it shows a vast crowd of people who are all there waiting to get in. And they're clearly going to be talking to each other. And I was, so in a sense, the theatre has already started outside where they are with their motorbikes and tuk-tuks and, sitting on the ground and things like that. The way that plays out in terms of each space is actually quite interesting. So again, with Sri Lanka, it's very striking. You report the same people came to the same performance, day after day after day. And it does occur to one that that's not because they particularly love the play, because it's because inside and outside, it's a safe space. So I wonder if you agree with that and have any comment about that.
Yeah, I quite agree with you there, Terrell. It certainly offers a safe space especially when, as you said, the outside becomes too risky. When there's no space for dissent in your regular everyday life, the imaginary of theater gives you a space to voice those thoughts, voice those opinions. So I totally agree with you. And one clarification, I love that photo that you mentioned.
Right.
So I keep using it in presentations, but I can't take credit for it. It's a photo taken by the theatre group. I did not take it, but I have permission to use it.
Right.
So I keep using it, and I should actually I should credit them in whatever presentations I'm using it in.
Okay.
Yeah, it was their work, not mine.
Okay, I understand. Many thanks.
Okay. So look, Terrell and I have several more questions, particularly about your ongoing work on that is more related not to theatre, but to visuality, to the use of film in peace building. But I think we'll stop our part here now and open it up to everyone else, because I see there's several people already with their virtual hand up who want to come in. So we will hand over to you, and then we will later on, maybe if we have time, Terrell and I will come back. But I just want to sort of thank you for this part of the session.